What are the next steps for both the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson after the Ravens use a non-exclusive franchise tag on Lamar? We talk about potential paths for both sides, get into why so many teams are reportedly already uninterested in Lamar, answer mailbag questions, and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen each and every day. Free and available, all podcasting platforms, also here in video form on YouTube. If you're here in video form, or if you're here in audio form, thank you so much as well for tuning in today. And we got some big news yesterday. The Ravens using the non-exclusive franchise tag on Lamar Jackson. It was that domino I talked about on yesterday's show of, might not be the biggest domino to fall, but it was a domino. And now that opens up a lot of other paths for both the Ravens and Lamar Jackson, next steps for both sides as well. So we'll talk about that throughout the show here today. First, talking about what an extension path could look like, what a trade path could look like, what him actually playing on the franchise tag could look like as well. Then in the second segment, we'll move into why are so many teams already so reportedly uninterested in Lamar, and if there is any potential collusion going on, something I'll probably get into more detail on another show, probably maybe even tomorrow. That'll be the show topic. We'll get into some of that preliminary discussion in the second segment. Then we have a lot of franchise tag questions, some coming before the deadline, some coming after. So we'll get into those in the final segment, talking Lamar, the non-exclusive tag, and a lot of that. But before we get into everything here today, if you hear this on YouTube, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel. We did a live show right as the news broke a couple hours after, so got to engage with the chat a lot. I really love engaging with all of the people who come through. You can put your ideas in there. I'll go live every time there is big news like that. So on YouTube, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel as well. And in audio form, be sure to follow along there as well. The audio of that live stream is actually up in audio form now. So if you want to go listen to that, you can. We're available anywhere you get your podcast there. So thank you for listening in audio form as well. We're a Daily Ravens podcast 5 days per week. So if you want that Ravens news, analysis, updates, and more, be sure to check us out anywhere you get your podcast, and also, again, here on YouTube in video form. But let's first talk about the potential paths and these next steps for Baltimore and for the Ravens as they try to maneuver through this whole contract situation, which just it feels so exhausting at this point. We're now at 25 months, I know, is a number that gets thrown around here. So for pretty much, I'll do a very brief history lesson, I guess, on the non-exclusive franchise tag. The non-exclusive franchise tag for Lamar Jackson, that is a $32.4 million one-year fully guaranteed deal, assuming he does play on that. But Lamar has the opportunity to go out there and talk with other teams and maybe find a deal he likes. And if he finds a deal with another team, he can go and take that to the Ravens and say, hey, I have this deal. And if the Ravens decide not to match, they have the option to. But if they decide not to match, Lamar leaves, the Ravens get 2 first-round picks. It is a risk. There's the chance that maybe there's a team out there that gives Lamar that deal that he wants, that fully guaranteed deal. And up to this point, the Ravens have not wanted to match that. Now, Lamar's worth more than 2 first-round picks. So if he leaves for another team and the Ravens only get back those 2 first-round picks, regardless of how high they are, it just feels like bad management of the whole Lamar Jackson situation. But I think that in this case, the non-exclusive franchise tag actually gives them more of a chance to retain Lamar than the exclusive tag would have. I think the exclusive tag, to me, would have signaled they were probably looking to deal him. They could maybe get back the Russell Wilson package or something like that. But now we're starting to see that maybe Lamar's market isn't what maybe he thought it was. And if a team's not willing to, one, give him the money he wants and give up 2 first-round picks, Baltimore's taking a calculated risk here that could pay off in a really big way, but it could also backfire in a really big way. So this was the expected outcome. I had my money on the exclusive tag, as I talked about, but I also had been very open to the fact that the non-exclusive tag could be a thing here. But the more you kind of dive into it and think about it a little bit, the more it does make sense what the Ravens are trying to do here, even if it is a big risk. But in a situation like this has gone on for so long, you kind of have to take a couple risks here and there if you're looking to get the most out of both sides here, both the Ravens and Lamar. So with this, it does not end the situation. A contract extension before the deadline would have, a trade before the deadline also would have. There are still paths, and as we talked about here on the show, and as I've said multiple times, the Ravens, they just can't move forward without a full resolution here. Lamar can begin talking with teams, I believe, on March 15th, and it adds a whole nother element to this Ravens offseason that hopefully, I had at least hoped would have gone away by this time, in terms of how much money they can spend on certain positions of need, how they'll have to restructure guys and maybe cut guys and extend guys. Without a full situation here with Lamar, or at least a full resolution, there are too many paths for comfort, it feels like. Now, I'm still 50-50. I think I'm 50-50 on Lamar staying or not in terms of if he will. But if we look at the Ravens salary cap table, I kind of went over it on the live stream. The Ravens have about $8-9-ish million. They're over the cap now. Before they were about 27, 28, even, in that 25 range, depending on who you looked at. They were in that $25-ish million range in terms of them being under the cap. Now they are $8 to $9 million over the cap. So what that would mean is there have to be restructures. They have to be cap compliant in a couple of days here. So the Ravens will have to restructure. Maybe they'll cut some guys. Maybe they'll extend some guys, push money down the line. But right now, the Ravens need to figure that out. And my whole thing is I'll go through each of the three paths. We'll start off with, let's start extension here. I think I started a different way on the live stream, but for extension, this is the path that makes the most sense to me for both sides, and it's the path that I would like to see because it helps out both sides, in my opinion. I think Lamar does want to be in Baltimore. I think the Ravens do want Lamar there. The issue is that both sides want different things in terms of contract money, contract structure. But for the Ravens right now, they need, as I talked about the cap situation, they need to figure out what is going on with them in terms of what their plans are, because there are just so many avenues here. And for Baltimore, with the extension, you can lower that first year cap hit, right? It's what I've been talking about, 10 million, 15 million. You can lower that cap hit and make it so that you can work around certain things and have it's a backloaded deal. So you have to kind of pay for it later, I guess. But this is what the Ravens need right now, is kind of those deals to run in succession with each other, as I've talked about, where Marlon Humphrey and Mark Andrews and Ronnie Stanley, those are your big three contracts right now in terms of cap hits. Those will start to expire, and then the next big three will come in. That, to me, being Roquan Smith, Marcus Williams, and hopefully what will be Lamar Jackson. That's the path, and if that happens, and you can go out there and maybe sign a Jacoby Myers or an Alan Lazard, not have to worry about the cap, and you can still restructure guys even with a Lamar Jackson extension, which opens up even more cap space. So, yeah, then maybe you can get into the cornerback room if you want to in the offseason with free agents. Maybe you can make a trade there as well. Maybe you trade for DeAndre Hopkins. You can bring back Ben Powers. The non-exclusive versus exclusive franchise tag, you're saving $13 million by giving them the non-exclusive instead of the exclusive. So if that's the tag you have to play on, if you're Lamar, you're losing $13 million on that. So in the event he does play on the tag, then you're looking at a situation where Baltimore really has to figure out what they want to do roster-wise, where they want to open up more holes just to get under the cap and get cap compliant. But maybe that means a Calais Campbell extension restructure, a Kevin Zeitler extension restructure. Chuck Clark looks like he'll be probably moved on from the offseason based off everything we've heard. You talk about Gus Edwards, maybe he's a salary cap casualty. Others include potentially Tyus Bowser or Michael Pierce or some of these options that you don't really want to let go, but you have to find it somewhere. Maybe you extend, Marlon Humphrey. We'll probably restructure Marlon Humphrey and Mark Andrews and Ronnie Stanley, some of those guys as well. You can push money down the line. You can maneuver around the cap, but there's only so much of that you can do. In the Lamar extension, that would be good for them. The Lamar franchise tag, it's about 14.5% of the Ravens' total cap right now. It's a big chunk. It's a big chunk, and the $45 million would have been even more. So the Ravens, they're taking that risk by not giving Lamar the exclusive to have those exclusive negotiating rights. But at the same time, I think that is the better option if they want to keep him around in Baltimore instead of move him in a trade. But let's say a trade is what ends up happening here. I think it's decently unlikely at this point now that it's actually an actual trade. And at this point, it would probably just be, him walking for 2 firsts, but it could still happen, definitely. And in that case, you're replenishing your draft capital, you're replenishing your roster potentially with a couple of young players. Obviously, the salary cap space isn't an issue anymore at that point. So it's pretty much a reset, but you're losing a franchise quarterback in Lamar Jackson, and those do not grow on trees. Not every team has a franchise quarterback, and why is that? Because they're hard to find. They're hard to draft. They're hard to develop. So There's just a lot that goes into the situation for the Ravens. Again, the tag was what I was expecting, so I wasn't too shocked, or I guess I had said to myself that, yeah, look, this is what's probably going to happen, so I'm not going to get too crazy, too disappointed about everything, because this is what it was, to me, this is what it was expected. But at the same time, there just has to be some sort of resolution here, whether it is an extension or whether it is a trade. One or the other has to happen, because the Ravens right now, there are still too many paths for them and next steps for them moving forward. But coming up, we'll be talking a bit about how so many teams all of a sudden declared they were not interested in Lamar Jackson. Reportedly, we'll talk about why that could be for a franchise quarterback and a player such as Lamar. So be sure to stay tuned. Still lots to dive into here on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And the midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. And for me, big Denver Nuggets guy over here, #1 seed in the West. They play the Bulls today, so I'll be looking at Jamal Murray's points, three-pointers, rebounds. He's 2 away from breaking the Nuggets' all-time three-pointer record. And they have so many more exclusive bets over at FanDuel, like the 2x3, 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay, so don't miss your chance to get the no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockdown. That's FanDuel.com/lockdown to learn more. Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. We return here to our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. Of course, the big news yesterday being the Ravens placing the non-exclusive franchise tag on Lamar Jackson. We did a live stream, instant reaction episode, me reacting to the news, engaging with chat, getting people's comments and questions in there too. It was a great time. We had over 100 people in there, which was great. We'll do live streams again every time there is big breaking news. So be sure to subscribe here on YouTube so you don't miss that. Also, like this video as well if you're enjoying the content over here. And also be sure to subscribe and follow along in audio form as well, anywhere you get your podcast. But we're now talking a bit about more about the Lamar situation and getting into the just how many teams have already said no, reportedly at least said no to Lamar, because it's crazy. I mean, right after the move was announced, the franchise tag was announced, all of a sudden it became, well, which teams could be interested, right? Is it Atlanta, Carolina, the Jets, Houston, Detroit, Las Vegas, Washington? And then all of a sudden you have teams come out. I mean, the Falcons were the first team that, a lot of people said, well, this is a perfect fit for Lamar if it were to happen. And then Diana Rossini of ESPN says the Falcons reportedly aren't going to be interested. And the Atlanta Falcons account retweets a tweet saying they're not going to be interested. Then you have reports about the Panthers and the Commanders and the Raiders and the Dolphins and all these teams that are reportedly not interested in a former MVP quarterback who is a franchise quarterback. And you're kind of thinking to yourself, well, Lamar makes all these teams better. And you understand from a team has to be willing. And it's kind of why the Ravens, I think, gave him the non-exclusive tag. A team has to be willing to, one, give up a fully guaranteed or close to it contract and 2 first-round picks in the first place for Lamar. But at the same time, I think that I just thought that more teams would be willing. And obviously, these are just reports. So we see stuff come out, and then maybe something changes, and that could be what ends up happening here. But it just happened in such quick succession. It just, one after the other, rapid fire. And then, people look at what happened with Deshaun Watson. Obviously, the Browns gave him that $230 million guaranteed contract. Did not go over well with the owners, or at least the rest of the owners throughout the NFL. Steve Bisciotti was very vocal about it and wasn't pleased. And a lot of the other owners have not been pleased with that whole situation. And with Lamar being a guy now who wants to prove that the Watson deal wasn't an outlier in terms of money, it's wants to kind of set a trend here and get that fully guaranteed deal. The NFLPA clearly is trying to kind of position for that as well. It seems like the owners just don't really want fully guaranteed contracts to come into the sphere here for the NFL, and calls of collusion, conspiracies, and all these different things have now popped up here because it was in such rapid succession. And it just feels like a market for a guy in Lamar Jackson who, look, he's not an unrestricted free agent or anything like that, but a guy that has all the accolades Lamar does, all the success that Lamar does, a player like that at the most premium of positions, the quarterback position in the NFL, a franchise quarterback, a guy like that doesn't hit free agency very often. And I know, again, not unrestricted, but there's not a lot of guys that have that pedigree. And all of a sudden get the opportunity to go talk to other teams with the opportunity to go get a guy like Lamar to insert into a team with a mediocre quarterback room, or a guy potentially isn't living up to the bill rookie wise, or young guys and living up to the bill. You can put Lamar in that room instead. So you have all these teams coming out one after the other, or at least reports coming out about these teams saying, yeah, no, not really. We're good. And I'm like, are you really good with Desmond Ridder? Are you really good with Tua? Are you really good with, Sam Darnold? And look, there are probably going to be 4 top 10 quarterbacks taken in this draft. Maybe some teams are just falling in love with Anthony Richardson, or falling in love with Bryce Young, or CJ Stroud, or Will Levis. But this is Lamar Jackson we're talking about here. And it does say something. Again, I understand the roster, the team building, the contract aspects, where any contract are given out of this substance, a fully guaranteed, let's throw out the number again. It's the trusty number, 5 years, 250, fully guaranteed. That's a big commitment. It's going to hinder your ability to do a lot roster wise. You're probably going to have to shuffle around some things, make things work to bring in a guy like that on that type of a contract. Plus you're giving up 2 first-round picks. And depending on who the team is, those could be very high first-round picks. So at this point, with all the teams we've heard, at least up to this point, obviously I'm recording this on Tuesday night here, it seems like it's Houston or Detroit, or maybe the Jets, if not for Aaron Rodgers, or bust at this point for Lamar. And so that's where, for Lamar putting out his feelers, he might not get the market he might have anticipated maybe 6 months ago, or, even a year ago, where it maybe looked a little more likely that he would have gotten something similar to what he was looking for if he just had a full 17-game season, played the way he did over the first 3 weeks. But I don't think this is a Lamar thing. I think this is literally just, the owners don't want fully guaranteed contracts to be a thing. Like, this is a money-driven league. It's a business. And this is where we're at right now. And I'm excited to kind of expand on it over the course of the rest of the week here, because this isn't the only conversation I want to have about it, because I think it is a serious issue where Lamar Jackson is getting the short end of the stick here. And he's been such a disrespected player throughout the course of his entire NFL career, dating back to college even, of a guy who had such a successful career at Louisville and was questioned about, could he play the quarterback position at the next level? He wins the MVP. More narratives come out. He can't throw. He can't do this. He can't do that. It's all these false things coming out. And now a player like Lamar hits the open market, and there's just barely any interest, it feels like, at least at this point. So definitely feels like some fishy's going on here. I think for Baltimore, this is also why it could mean that Lamar just stays for either, if it's this year and he plays, I always bring up and I've brought it up before, the tag and play and then tag and play again, where it's 2 franchise tags for Lamar. But if we throw out that 5-2-50 fully guaranteed, $32 million compared to $50 million is quite a downgrade. It's $18 million. And in that case, maybe if you're Lamar, you say, well, maybe the 5-200 with, I don't know what the guarantees would be, 160 something. Maybe that's the right path. Maybe Lamar's looking for the 5-year 230 with 200 guaranteed. Maybe it's 5 years 240 with 205 guaranteed. But if a team's not willing to go out there and even talk to Lamar and say, hey, where's your asking price? What are you feeling right now? Then at that point, I think Baltimore's the best option. And I've said it all along, where I do think Baltimore is the best option for Lamar Jackson. And I think Lamar Jackson is the best option for the Baltimore Ravens. I just think the Ravens have built this offense around Lamar. Lamar obviously has meant so much to their offense, and replacing a guy, going back into quarterback mediocrity for the Ravens and having to hit on another quarterback is not an easy task. Lamar Jacksons do not grow on trees. Lamar Jackson's unique. There's only one guy. There's only one Lamar Jackson. So I think that for what the Ravens have right now, the non-exclusive tag is not the end of the world, but I think it does, if this is what it is, and Lamar doesn't, July 15th is a deadline, if this is still going on by the time the draft ends, the Ravens offseason would be severely impacted. I think there has to be some idea within the building. It feels like they have some sort of confidence that they'll be able to get him back at least on the franchise tag, and he'll sign that and play on it in 2023. But then that's a whole other conversation in terms of does he even want to play on the franchise tag at this point, which could be and it could not be. So we're just getting started here. Again, there could have been a solution. We're done talking about it, but the franchise tag gives a lot of other opportunities for other teams to come in. Obviously gives opportunities for the Ravens to negotiate, for Lamar to negotiate as well. So plenty of Lamar Jackson talk still on the horizon, and we'll continue talking about it in our final segment, answering mailbag questions about the franchise tag and a lot more. So we should stay tuned. So a ton to dive into here on Locked On Ravens. We return here. It's our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher still here with you on this midweek edition. And since it is a midweek edition here, we're going to be diving into some mailbag questions. And we'll first start off. It's a lot about the franchise tag and everything. And some people asked these questions before the actual news dropped. Others asked after. So we'll get into all of them, at least as many as I can here in this final segment. First here comes from Eferse, who says, question with the non-exclusive tag. Some thinking of the team could excessively front load an offer to prevent the Ravens from matching. I think that violated the poison pill clause in the CBA. Also, can you confirm that LJ doesn't have to accept the highest bid or match on the non-exclusive tag? Yeah, Lamar doesn't have to accept anything on the tag. He can, play on the tag if he wants to. There's no, Lamar has to agree to a contract with another team or with the Ravens. He can play on the tag, and that's perfectly acceptable on the 32.4. The first part of this question in terms of front loading, I just don't think a team wants to do that. I just don't. There are teams that could. I think Atlanta would have been the team to do that and try to get that poison pill clause stuff going on. But I just think teams right now, at least at the time of this recording, they're not interested in the whole Lamar Jackson situation. And I think it's the owners. It's the owners trying to not let fully guaranteed contracts get into the NFL here. So there could be teams that front load and prevent the Ravens from matching, but then you get into all the other CBA stuff that goes on there. So a couple of good questions there. Then we'll move on to Matthew Seamus, who says, if you lose LJ on an unrestricted tag, how are the 2 first rounders determined? Where and when are they given? So I think Matthew meant the non-exclusive, but those 2 first rounders, I believe they're just the team's next 2 first rounders that year, or just the next 2 successive first rounders. So for example, Miami, they don't have a first round pick this year. So it actually, the Dolphins can't negotiate with Lamar until next year, which please, I hope that situation is not going to next year. But those other teams, I think it's 2023 and 2024. I don't think it's like, if let's say the Lions, who have 2 first round picks, I don't think it's those 2. I think it would be a 2023 pick and a 2024 pick on those. And then Gunny Ravens says, hey, KL, outside of signing Lamar long-term, what can the Ravens organization do to restore the confidence of anyone with doubts in the Ravens' ability to operate as most considered them to be one of the top tier franchises? And so this, I think, goes back to, the NFLPA survey. And I think signing Lamar would I think kind of take the heat off of what the Ravens have had. And honestly, this whole situation has a little bit. I think people aren't necessarily talking about Steve Saunders anymore. But I think when people saw that stuff come out here, and obviously how the Lamar situation has been handled both by the Ravens and by Lamar, I think it's just being able to be consistent on the field and just improving on the areas where the NFLPA survey and the players said that they need to improve upon. I mean, the fact that the Ravens got the 32nd, it was F-, again, like an F- isn't even a real grade. Like the lowest you can get is an F. The Ravens got below that in an F-. To have a guy like Steve Saunders still with the team after what happened in 2020, to have a guy like Greg Roman, which something probably should have happened last offseason, to have him continue to stick around this past season, while there were definitely reasons why, I still think, it's been too late with some of these decisions. When action and change needs to happen, whether that is contracts or staff changes or policies or whatever it may be, equipment upgrades, these things need to happen. And I think the Ravens sometimes, I don't want to say it's complacency, but it kind of is complacency, and they kind of get into rhythms and they trust their guys. And I think it's fine to trust your guys, but you have to know when to move on from your guys as well. So good question there from Gunny Ravens. Caleb asks, which tag, the exclusive or non-exclusive, would work best for Lamar and the Ravens if he were to be tagged? So obviously Lamar was tagged non-exclusive. I think non-exclusive, when really looking at it a little more, I was kind of 50-50 on which one, but I think the non-exclusive for Baltimore gives them the best shot to work on something and get something done. I think the exclusive tag would have signaled a trade. I think the non-exclusive tag signals that they're confident they can re-sign him and bring him back at the very least on the actual tag this year. So it's going to be interesting to see that whole dynamic work over these next couple of weeks here, and hopefully not a couple of months, but maybe a couple of months as the situation continues to linger and linger and linger for both sides here. Then we have a question from Jay Magnifico. He says, with the Ravens reportedly meeting with Anthony Richardson, what impact do you think this has, if any, towards re-signing and or placing the franchise tag on Lamar? I mean, I think that in this case now, the Ravens, with placing the tag on Lamar, again, as I just said, I think that the Ravens feel feel a bit confident that they can work this out. Now, it is still a big risk. So I think this is the Richardson meeting was probably due diligence, where if Lamar does leave or if there is a trade, they know they have potentially a guy that they really like and they had that meeting at the combine. So I think that was more of a due diligence type thing. I'm not saying they're not interested, but I think, in terms of if the Ravens fall in love with Anthony Richardson, would they move on from Lamar? I mean, it depends, but at the same time, we've heard the Ravens say that they love Lamar and they want Lamar to be there. So I think that it's more of a due diligence type thing here. Sub Gur says, if they don't sign Lamar, would it hurt the franchise's reputation? He has been easily their best quarterback, yet for whatever reason, he refused to pay him. Why would high-profile players want to come to an organization like that? And I don't think it's necessarily a reputation hit. I mean, I think it's a fumble. Like if the Ravens lose Lamar, it is a fumble. But at the same time, I think that it would hurt the Ravens more in the aspect that players want to play with Lamar. And if Lamar isn't there, then, obviously that appeal goes away. And for guys like Calais Campbell and Justin Houston, I talked about this on the live stream. If Calais Campbell and Justin Houston have one more season in them, are they going to want to play with a team that has Lamar? I think sure. But if it's a rookie quarterback in Baltimore, if it's a bridge guy, if it's a mid-tier guy in Baltimore, would they have their last ride be with that guy? Would they rather want to go to a contending team like a Buffalo or a Kansas City or a Cincinnati or a Philadelphia who has that franchise guy in place? I think it'd probably be the latter. So I think it has more of an impact, the Lamar situation, in terms of guys want to play with Lamar. And with Todd Monken, I think a Monken-Lamar combo, I think makes the Ravens more appealing, to be honest, as a whole. And then we also have a couple of questions here from Tony Yeo, who says, how many yards does Wentz throw under Harbs next year? Oh, man, I hope none. I hope Carson Wentz is not in Baltimore. I don't want anything to do with Carson Wentz in Baltimore personally. And then how many rings would Lamar have if Harbs was rightfully let go in 2018? Harbs is an anchor to the team's success in the worst way possible. No more Hall of Famers to carry him since 12. And look, 2 playoff wins in how long? And there's debate with Harbaugh, right? Is Harbaugh the right guy? Is it grown too stale in Baltimore? It depends on who the guy was. I mean, it's hard for me to make a prediction in terms of like if Lamar would have won rings under a different head coach, because I don't know who that head coach would be. I think for the Ravens, and this is what I'm kind of talking about and what I talked about a little bit with when change/action needs to happen. I think the right change happened this offseason in terms of what, like the trajectory that everything. If Lamar did not come in and save John Harbaugh's season in 2018, he was gone. Like that's just what it was. There were the trade rumors about, I think it was Miami, if I'm not mistaken, that would have happened, and then somebody else would have been brought in. But in terms of the arc that it has taken since Lamar saved his job in 2018, this was the Greg Roman year to me, where I think firing John Harbaugh, that would come this upcoming year. If the Ravens struggle again, if the Todd Monken offense doesn't work and the offense is still bad, and if the defense takes a step back, if the Ravens struggle, they finish with another, wild card exit, divisional round exit, that is complacency to me, where this will be what I say the whole offseason, where they've had the coordinator changes. At this point, if it doesn't work, it's Harbaugh. That is what it is, where you need to be able to have consistency in this league, but not be complacent with just, I don't want to call it mediocre consistency, because look, John Harbaugh's been a regular season guy. He's been very successful there, but the regular season doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Obviously, you have to play well then to get in the playoffs, but if you can't win in the playoffs, you have to find somebody who will. You have to be able to trust your roster a little bit. And I think the Ravens, they've gone over a lot of turnover in their roster the past couple of seasons. The defensive coordinator changed last year. The offensive coordinator changed this year. If they're still unable to advance past the divisional round, the team has not made the AFC Championship game since they won the Super Bowl in 2012, 2013. That can't happen. That's 10 years. It's 10 years since it happened. So you have to be able to say to yourself as an organization, despite the fact that, look, the Ravens, again, they're loyal. They like their guys. They put trust in their guys. They don't look at the outside noise. But something has to give. So in terms of how many rings Lamar would have won, I mean, I think that 2019 season was the year. I think they could have had one then, just slipped away from him in the divisional round. But you have to be able to consistently win in the playoffs. And if your coach can't do that, if your team can't do that, obviously the offensive coordinator's new now. The defensive coordinator has a year under his belt. You then point to John Harbaugh. So I think it's fine the Ravens didn't fire Harbaugh this year. I think next year, if we have more of the same, even after a new offensive system gets installed, then I think you look more to Harbaugh in that situation. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Again, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, follow along in audio form as well. When we get back here tomorrow, it is more Ravens talk from us and continuing to talk about Lamar Jackson and so much more. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow.